Good afternoon and welcome to another video update from Rick and Candace Turner. Today I'm sitting next to Mike Wolfe. Mike's become a good brother and a good friend of mine since we've been here in Seguatepec, and we wanted to take this time just to chat with Mike about his background, how he came to Seguatepec in Honduras, and obviously I think he was in Guatemala before that, but Mike's been here for I think a little over 10 years, about 10 years, is that correct?
Yeah.
And so share with us a little bit about, Mike, how you came to be here. I know you don't call yourself a missionary, but yet you're very missional in how you enjoy making disciples and the whole relationship stuff. So tell us a little bit about how you got here and a little bit about what your focus is.
Okay. Well, Rick, thanks for doing this. I enjoy these times to talk about missions and work and business in Honduras. We have been down here about 10 years. I always say we wandered down here and never went home. That's not really quite the story, but long story short, we didn't have intentions on staying. We came to visit for about 6 months, study Spanish, learn the culture. Our boys were homeschooled at that time, and so it was just kind of added in, along with the idea that we wanted to do some missions work and actually experience it in a foreign country. We'd done a couple of short-term mission trips, but to actually live it, right?
Sure.
And so after about 6 months, when it was time to decide whether or not it was time to go home or not, we just decided to stay. And then the big question came up: how were we going to support ourselves? And that's one of the reasons I don't really think of ourselves as missionaries, because we didn't come down with a missions organization, we didn't come down under a church, and we didn't come down with support. So when it came time to begin discussing living here, we had to decide how were we going to support ourselves and how was I going to feed my family.
Yeah, that's, in my opinion, what defines faith. You came here on a short-term basis, and then you decided to say that was all God, and God worked miracles, obviously, for you and your family.
100%.
Be here.
100%.
Which is just truly amazing. He is a God of miracles.
Yes.
He is a God of miracles. So I want to come back just to one thing that you just said, was you came on short-term trips, and you wanted to experience it more in the long term. So as our teacher said, digamy, tell me a little bit about how you see today the difference between a short term, which are needed.
Right.
They are needed, different focuses, different things, versus long term. And the emotional, the physical, the psychological, the different effects of that. Could you expand a little bit on that before we go on?
Yeah, and Rick, that's one of my favorite questions, because there's short-term missions, there's people that like them, they don't like them, but I can tell you that almost every full-time missionary that has been is down here or around the world typically started out on a short-term missions trip. So for me, if for no other reason, right, are short-term missions worth it? I think so, because it opens up this idea of long-term missions to people that often wouldn't have considered it from the very beginning. Right? Oh, I'm not missions material. But then they come down and God touches their heart. They see the needs, they see the opportunities, and they go back home with a different outlook on missions. Okay? And on top of that, short-term missions also often help fund the ministries that are happening. There's something about when you go and visit a children's home, and then you go home, and now you know those kids, you know they need food every
Absolutely.
day, and so you help support that.
That's good.
All right, that's my take on short-term missions. On the difference on long-term missions versus short-term missions. Short-term missions is a week of excitement, high emotional energy, and you go home and you're worn out and you go back to your normal life. The reverse is true for the long-term mission. Short-term missions are a lot of work. You're putting yourself into a week of people who needs, and it's a whole new experience for them, and then they leave, and now you're worn out, but you go back to normal life as well. It just looks a little bit different, and it's in a different place.
Yeah, I know that for Candace and I, the short-term 10, 12-day trips versus when we arrived a year and a half ago in Guatemala, and now in Honduras and back and forth, there's a huge difference, a huge difference between them, but they're both needed. They're both needed, very much so. And so the benefits of both, which is good. So We have a lot of common interests. We have
We
a lot
do.
of personality traits that are similar.
Yes.
We both get bored rather easily.
Yes.
We both love starting things. We like to see things grow. We like to do things.
Yeah.
And I remember the first time, I think that you had us over for dinner, and we sat and chatted about our ministry focus. And our ministry focus is obviously seeing the kingdom of Jesus Christ expanded. And we love doing that through building relationships, making disciples, and establishing what we refer to as self-sustaining ministries.
Mhm.
It's a way of looking at small businesses, and our focus is on the national pastors for their churches, be it rural, be it in a city such as Secotepeki, Quetzaltenango, or rural, Tapachula, different types of places that we may be. With that focus, and we've talked about that as small businesses, how do you see that benefiting the nationals and the pastors here, helping them do that, versus us not being here? Is that kind of a clear question, or is it a little muddy?
No, give it, it's a little muddy, give it kind of just.
So, I guess my question is, with our focus on self-sustaining ministries, missions traditionally is looked upon as, it's church planting, it's evangelism. This is just a little bit of a spin, a little bit differently.
Okay.
How do you see that interact with ministry and business in general, and how those two can interact together?
Okay. Yeah, and I have very strong feelings on that. Business, in my opinion, is probably one of the absolutely best ways that you can share the gospel, and that you can build relationships, and that you can show the integrity of Christ. Jesus himself spoke many times about business. There was always references to money or buying and selling. For some reason, in the missions world, business has kind of gotten a bad rap.
Agreed.
But you spoke of these Guatemalan pastors that are on your heart to help. Listen, the ties that come into these small rural churches are almost non-existent. And so many of these pastors are trying to do God's work, and yet they have almost nothing to feed their family. And some of them believe that to do business isn't godly, that they need to just put their faith in God. That's between them and God. But I'm going to say that as a business owner, you will meet more people throughout the day. You will be able to show them what integrity in business means. It's the good measure, pat down, running over, right? That's another example of good business. And God will provide through business opportunities to meet people, to pray for people, like far more than if you were sitting inside of your church office. Okay? You mentioned one of your pastors has a taxi. How many people are in and out of that taxi every day that he's able to witness to them? Okay.
It's amazing how I think Pastor Rene can use that as his business has grown, and he has 2 employees, he has 2 other taxis. So the Lord has blessed him, and it's amazing how he's done that. Pastor Rene's in Tajamuco, Guatemala, has a taxi service. But yeah, you're right. The amount of people that he can see in a day or in a week that he may never touch again.
Right.
It is amazing how he has an opportunity that a lot of times we don't. So we don't think of business as being an opportunity, but really, in my opinion, I see a complete intersection.
Absolutely.
In business and in ministry. But yet again, I see it in medical missions.
Mm-hmm.
I see it in all types of mission work, because Christ was relational.
Absolutely.
Christ was relational, and he was among the public. He was, whether or not he wasn't doing business, he was doing ministry per se, evangelism about the gospel, the kingdom of the gospel, etc. But I believe that God can use these men in a business not only to take care of their family, but also to share Jesus Christ on a regular basis.
I 100% agree with that.
So we look at that down here, but let's spin this back a second to when we're in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm sure there's businessmen and there's people there. How can businessmen or people in the States, as well as here, view their business as a ministry?
Well, the really good news is that God is universal.
Amen.
Right?
Amen.
So what works in Honduras or Guatemala has to work in the United States.
It's true.
right? Nothing really changes. And I'll just tell you, I'm a businessman here, and I'll tell you the greatest challenge I think that any businessman has in this aspect is to remember the primary focus of our lives, not of our business essay, but of our
It's true.
lives. Because we can get so wrapped up in business that we forget about the opportunities that God wants to provide through that.
That's true.
But business is business no matter where. You're impacting people's lives. You're showing either the integrity of Christ or you're showing something else, right? And
That's
so
true.
whatever principles work here work anywhere else in the world.
That's true. So Mike, you ran a business, you started a business in the States.
Hmm.
You've done it here. What are some of the differences?
Well, for one thing, understanding culture is like an imperative.
And the
Would you agree with that?
And the culture's a tad bit different.
Right.
Way different.
No, I guarantee you if I went to, God forbid I was sent to Afghanistan or something like that, it would be an entirely different cultural experience.
Right.
So what works here or is different here in Honduras, Guatemala, which are very similar, is going to be, again, different no matter where else you go.
That's
Latin
true.
America tends to be, in general, the same. European culture would be different. But no matter what the differences are, the main point is if you're coming in as a foreigner or an outsider, you must take the time to learn the culture as it with regarding to business or whatever other aspect that it is that you want to attack. So if you want to plant a church, you should still learn the culture.
Right.
Because if you don't want to offend, right? If you don't want to drive people away, you have to understand what makes them tick, right?
Yeah. That's when I look at my personality, because this is what we call a warm climate,
Mm-hmm.
Versus a cold climate. And I was always doing business in the States, very warm climate. You come in, you sit down, how are you doing? But yet you still eventually kind of get right to the point.
Right.
I have found here, whether or not you're talking about church, you're talking about Bible study, you're talking about business, wanting to meet people, there's a longer drawn out time of
So true.
festivities.
Yes.
Of getting to know people and do that, which I have noticed is a big difference in the culture. So I think is that what you're getting at, is learning the culture so that we're not offensive. It's not that we want to be offensive,
Right.
it's just a huge difference in the culture.
It's a huge difference. Yeah, and I mean, I know we're limited on time. I could go into a long list of the differences. That was a great example. One of the things I still forget is like, I'll send a WhatsApp message and I'll just get right to the point. And instead, I need to send first, good morning, how are you?
Yeah.
Hope your family's well, and then get into it. To the American mentality, it's kind of a waste of time.
Right.
And these are people that are more like clients that I don't know well. If it was a close friend, it would be okay to get right to the point. But there's just such a long list of differences in culture that are very, very, very important to learn.
Yeah.
Because number one, people will respect you more. They will accept you into their lives and into, no matter if it's missionary, businessman, whatever, but you will become more accepted the more that you are able to relate to them culturally.
I agree. And Candace and I have learned that, the interaction, I even look at it, in the States, there's different cultures.
Yes.
You can be in a different city, and you do business differently. You may come in and have more, it depends on the business too, and the personalities, more of a drawn out, just talking to each other, how's life, how the family, how this, before you get into the actual business transaction
Yeah.
discussions. But there's other times where you're in a situation where you come in and you're right to the point, and here we go.
Yeah.
And I think that some of that gets into the difference between, which has been said, that Central America or Latin America is very relational based,
Mm-hmm.
where the United States, in many terms, is very task based.
Task-based, outcome-oriented.
Outcome oriented, and we've talked about this, how I've struggled with that.
Yeah.
I struggle with that transaction based, is I'm used to doing things, and then it slows down, and you got to work on that. Even though I think of myself as being very relational.
Yeah.
But compared to some things here, I'm not relational at all. So it's just a difference.
I would point out, and just before we move on, for instance, so, here I am in my, well, usually it's a pocket tee, and Rick is here in his button down, collar shirt. Rick is far more appropriately dressed for what we're doing right now, and he's far more appropriately dressed for a business meeting. This is, what is this, that Saturday?
Today's Saturday.
But
Today's
you'd
Saturday.
probably find me like this on Monday and Tuesday also.
Yeah.
But that's another something that I really have to consciously work at and remember is if I'm going into a meeting, I need to make sure that I am properly dressed.
Sure.
Okay? We're so casual in the US. It's, oh yeah, come to work in shorts, whatever. But it's just not the case. And what happens, now people know me, I'm pretty well known down here. But so if I do have to come in this, it's okay. But if I was to come in without, they would not take me as seriously as if I'd walked in with a button down. So that's just another small example.
I think you told me an example about trying to go get papers in they would call it the courthouse here.
Right.
The difference, you got to dress up, you had to wear a suit, you had to do different types of
No
things.
shorts.
So no shorts.
And not even going in the building.
So,
Yeah.
which is good. So, now, as we move on, and again, we try to limit these to 20, 25 minutes.
Mhm.
With business, we do meet a lot of people. And we think of the Great Commission. The Great Commission is to go and make disciples. And we've had many coffees, many discussions on making disciples and the focus of the gospel that ways. How would you see in the business world, i.e. we can present the gospel, we can build that relationship, but how do you tie that into making disciples? That's a big question.
That is a big question. I would have to say that it's probably a question that I would spend more time than we have on.
Sure.
But I think that the main thing that I have seen Rick and practiced in my life is that discipleship making is we're not going to make hundreds of disciples. We may be able to influence and plant seeds, maybe even bring people to the Lord if we're evangelistically minded enough to say, hey, do you know Christ, right? But to actually make disciples is a lifelong process. I know we always go back that Jesus had 12, right? He impacted those 12 went out and impacted the world. But in my own personal life, my sons, I have been able to disciple them. We spent a tremendous amount of time together when they were children, and now they work with me here in Honduras, and so we still do. There have been a few people that are in my life that I am able to spend that amount of quality time with. Now, if you have employees, okay, if you are a business that has employees, that is a golden opportunity to disciple. We do this here at the Spanish Institute, our language school, right? We have a pastor that comes in about once a month, and he does a devotional with them. They are not obligated to come, but they almost always do. And then, so beyond just that point of just having a devotional, speaking about God and His Word, how we interact and relate to them as those who are over them, in this case bosses, right? Do we treat them justly? Do we treat them with respect? Do we pay them well? All of these kinds of things, I believe, embody really what true discipleship is, showing others how they should live their lives. Now, obviously, the responsibility to live your life well in front of them is the critical part, not to be perfect, but to live your life well in front of them. So, yeah, I would say 100% sure that through business, you can make disciples.
I would agree, and I think that it's important, and that's why I think working with these pastors, if the Lord blesses them and they work hard and they have employees, but yet again, their interaction with people is a lot of times that I have found in my life's experience is that our words, our actions, our deeds, usually it's how we make people feel that they remember more than anything.
Yeah.
And it's our actions that versus what we always say.
Right.
And so just living our life in a Christ-like fashion,
Yes.
according to biblical principles, I believe, and I love the saying, are we a draw or are we a repellent for Christ? And if we're a draw, and especially when we go through tough times,
Right.
you're going through issues, they see how you respond, they ask questions. Those are great opportunities to share with them, but also how we interact with people we work with, whether they're clients, whether or not they're prospects, whether or not employees, another business owner, gives us an opportunity to demonstrate Christ in us.
Absolutely.
I think it's important to do that. I think I want to circle one back to a business thing is, that I think is important, that I find interesting is, in the States, and we've had this discussion, in the States, in general, I'm not talking about everybody, but in general, there's such a focus on a certain return at the end of the year.
Right.
That, in my opinion, from talking to Honduran businessmen, we've had conversations, etc., that isn't the same focus here.
Right.
Could you explain that a little bit, since you've kind of run places both?
Yeah, so, yeah, we are definitely like, this has got to have a certain ROI or it's just not worth doing, right?
Yeah.
We value our time, right? Now, the wealthy, like say here in Honduras, there's very wealthy people and they think that way. They're wealthy for a reason, right? But the average business owner is far more driven about making enough money for today, right? So if your business only produces enough money for today and supplies your food, they're happy.
Right.
Would they like more? Sure. But they are much more just looking at today. The second thing is that they look at what can I hand down to my children.
Oh, that's good.
Okay? So for instance, they may put a lot of money into building a hotel that only has maybe 2 guests a night in it. 25 rooms, 2 guests a night, and they're paying the girl to sit at the front desk. For them, it's not as much about, is that gonna make me a profit today? It's, is it a place where I can put my money and I can pass this down to my children?
Sure. That's good.
Okay? So those are some of the differences that I've seen.
That's good, that's good. Well, there's a lot of questions, and we could continue to go on to, but I think that we'll probably call it good with that today. Thank you so much for your time. I enjoy our conversation and look forward to more of those.
Always.
We thank you for joining us today, and hopefully it's informative. You've enjoyed it, and God bless, and we'll talk again soon. Thank you.